Hello and welcome to tonight's virtual town hall on public service loan forgiveness. On behalf of the Student Borrower Protection Center and Student Debt Crisis Center, we're thrilled to have you all join us. This evening's presentation is being recorded and will be made available in the coming days. To begin tonight's event, I want to introduce Natalia Abrams, President and founder of the Student Debt Crisis Center. Natalia?
Thank you so much, Walt. And thank you for having us. And at Student Debt Crisis Center, we are honored to join you at the Student Borrower Protection Center for this important event. We know that hundreds of thousands of teachers, nurses, frontline workers, and other public service professionals were promised student loan forgiveness in exchange for years of their service to their communities, their country. But after rising to the moment, working on the front lines through a national pandemic, serving in our classrooms, delivering healthcare, and in some cases risking their lives, they have been denied debt relief and left behind. In July, for the first time, the Department of Education asked for the public to share their stories about public service and debt forgiveness. And since then, and this is really amazing work, so thank you all, over 30,000 public service workers have already shared their stories and made their voices heard. This period represents an opportunity to call on the Biden administration to take action and deliver promised debt relief to public service workers across the country. Today, we're going to hear from those public service workers, but first, it is my honor to introduce Randi Weingarten. Randi is the president of the American Federation of Teachers, part of the AFL-CIO, a union of 1.7 million teachers, paraprofessionals, and school-related personnel. This is higher education faculty and staff, nurses, other healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators. When it comes to standing up for public service workers and advocating for PSLF, that's public service loan forgiveness, Randi has led the fight to fix this broken system and hold both loan servicers and the Department of Education accountable. In fact, in October of 2018, Randi led and supported a filing of a major class action lawsuit against Navient, a student loan servicer that's not very liked, for failure to help borrowers get on track for public service loan forgiveness. Again, in July of 2019, Randi was the first to file a major lawsuit against Betsy DeVos for her failure to implement public service loan forgiveness correctly. Weingarten versus DeVos gave voice to AFT members that have been wrongfully denied public service loan forgiveness due to servicer error or administration failures. And these errors are huge. They're giant craters that need to be fixed. In addition, Randi has been a fierce advocate on the Hill, testifying before Congress and standing side by side with Senator Ward to fix this system and get AFT members who are teachers, nurses, bus drivers, and higher ed faculty the loan forgiveness that they were once promised. Randi, do we have you here today?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can. Yes, we can.
And
thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you so much, Natalia. And look, we are, I'm in, you can see from the hotel, sorry, I'm in, I'm forgetting where I am. I'm in Dallas. I'm trying for these 6 weeks or 7 weeks that started at the beginning of August to be in 20 different states. This is now my 15th, and really trying to support my members and communities that are trying to reopen schools for our kids and do it safely. And in Dallas, for example, teachers who have gotten, who are indebted because of student debt, paraprofessionals, others, they have been making thousands of phone calls, canvassing neighborhoods, getting our kids back to school. And today, for example, the superintendent of the Dallas schools honored what our local has been doing and our members have been doing, and we're doing the same thing in so many other places. Why do I start with that? Because we are a community here, and teachers want what kids need. And they basically, as you just said, they basically had a social contract with the United States government that says, in exchange for them being in public service, they would, pay their loans for 10 years. And then the rest of their loans, whatever it was, were going to be forgiven. That was public service loan forgiveness. And it was done by Republicans and Democrats, by, President Bush and, Hillary Clinton. And what happened is that in 2017, when the debt became, when the promise was supposed to be redeemed, Betsy DeVos was in the Ed Secretary's office, and she did everything in her power to make it worse. It's like, and then when she left office, she's like, oh, we shouldn't have had, we shouldn't be doing these kind of redemption. She, who is rich enough to pay for lots of people to go to college, she doesn't want to make sure that people who needed student debt redemption, who needed to have, who couldn't go to college without having debt, they had a right to have that debt forgiven after 10 years. And we know, and I mean, you've been fighting this for years, that, it was more the exception than the rule. 95, 96, 98% of people who applied for student debt forgiveness didn't get it. So yes, right now we're in the middle of trying to fight COVID. We're in the middle of trying to get schools reopened. We honor frontline providers like EMT workers and firefighters and grocery store workers and healthcare workers, but we are not doing what we need to do to make sure we are protecting their families. And that's why, we brought that case, and we know that there's lots of other things that are game changers for people. We are pushing together for a $50,000 up to $50,000 debt cancellation for everyone. We are pushing for, we pushed for the moratorium on student debt payments to be extended, particularly given all the other things that are going on, particularly given that there's now going to be a new sheriff in town in terms of the Department of Education with Miguel Cardona. And we know, and we're seeing how many of the student loan providers are basically saying, that they want to take a walk because they don't want that accountability. But at the end of the day, even if we can get any of these things done, we got the moratorium extended, hopefully we can get debt cancellation, but still at the end of the day, we got to fix public service loan forgiveness. We have to make sure that if you worked for some public service as a teacher, as a nurse, anything else for 10 years, the rest of your debt is canceled. And we have to make sure that all those people who have been entangled in the bureaucracy get unentangled, and we make sure that their debts get redeemed and forgiven. And so that's why, we filed that lawsuit. We are pursuing that lawsuit. We're pursuing it, even though the name of the defendant now is Cardona, not DeVos, because we want to make sure that that this promise is kept for people. And that's what we are continuing to do. And I really, really, really appreciate all the work that we've done together with SBPC. And I'm really honored to be part of this. And so the last thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, we got to continue to work together to make sure a promise made is a promise kept. And here that means forgiving the debt of those who worked in public service for 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Randi, for your remarks, and obviously for all you and AFT are doing to stand up for public service workers and continuing to fight. I think everyone at the SBPC echoes what you said, and you all at AFT have been fantastic partners, and making this progress, working alongside you has been an incredible honor for us. So now we're going to shift to the next part of our event and hear from three people who, like thousands of other public service workers, are moving towards promised loan forgiveness. For many of you watching at home, I'm sure elements of their stories will sound familiar tonight, because there's thousands of people like these three out across the country. Dedicated public service workers serving their communities, giving back while trying to manage the burden of student debt and overcome obstacles and setbacks that unfortunately have become synonymous with the PSLF program. With that being said, we're extremely grateful to have joining us tonight Nicole Braun-Cotton, an acute and critical care physical therapist from Portland, Oregon, Jacqueline Dombroff, a public defender from New York City, and Samantha Coulter, a data analyst with the San Francisco Unified School District and a fellow with the Student Debt Crisis Center. Thanks to all three of you for being with us tonight. So Nicole, I want to begin with you. Could you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you've been engaged in both during COVID and before, and generally how student debt has impacted your life.
Absolutely. Thank you, Walter. So I'm a hospital-based physical therapist. I work in critical care. I chose to work in physical therapy because I believe that rehabilitation medicine is a lot about freedom and function, and that those things matter for people's quality of life and their ability to participate in their communities. I work with folks who are experiencing really serious trauma or learning how to survive with enduring disability. My job isn't really what most people think of when they imagine physical therapy. I treat people immediately after life-changing traumatic events when they're still in the hospital, often when they're still in the ICU. So on a daily basis, I get in bed with patients who are so sick that they can't sit up on their own. And for the past 17 months, that's included COVID patients. How student debt has affected me? Well, it's really demoralizing to say, but it's pretty simple. I'm 43 years old. I'm educated at the doctoral level, which is what's required for entry into my field. I work an average of over 40 hours a week, and I live in my mother's basement. When the student loan payments went on COVID deferral, I thought, oh, I'll put the money into a savings account and we'll see what happens, and I can pay it down in a lump sum a little bit later. But first I bought a pickup truck and I paid that truck off in 9 months. So if I didn't have the debt burden that I have, I could easily make a mortgage payment on a perfectly respectable home. And my student debt is the only debt that I carry.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know, again, the experiences all three of you are going to be sharing tonight are ones that are going to resonate. And I think it will help people realize that how many people are walking these similar paths. So going from Nicole, Jacqueline, could you tell us, I'm going to have you introduce yourself also, about the work you're doing in New York City and your experiences trying to access public service loan forgiveness.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I am a public defender, as Walter mentioned. What that means is that I represent indigent New Yorkers who are accused of crimes in Manhattan. So I meet my clients who are in custody, in police custody, right before they meet a judge for the first time. And I tell them what they're being accused of. We talk about what happened and what's going to happen. And this right before they meet a judge. And I stay with them until the end of their case, whether that's them being in custody, being out of custody and fighting their case. I stay with them through whether it's a dismissal, a verdict at the end of trial, or a plea. And it involves a lot more than legal work, sort of being a guide. It's talking to their families. It's being at times a bit of a therapist, being a sounding board, and sort of being whatever a particular client needs me to be in that moment, which I think for most of the clients that I meet is one of the worst times of their life. It's after having been arrested. And in trying to access public loan forgiveness has just been just a nightmare. The anxiety that I have about this never actually happening, and about always being in this really scary amount of debt, it has taken an emotional toll on me for sure. And that's with the job that already takes an emotional toll on me.
Thank you for sharing that. Samantha, I want to turn to you, obviously, last but not least, but could you also, introduce yourself and talk about, how student debt has affected you, impacted you as you moved forward in your career?
Sure. My name is Samantha Coulter. I am a data analyst for the San Francisco School District. So as part of that role, I help to support school leaders by putting together information about their students. So I work with principals and other leaders at the school district level. I also try to help make data accessible to others. So through projects like creating dashboards that are publicly available about student information. So I kind of do a variety of different things to try to help support students and the district at large. But yeah, student debt has been a huge, it's been a huge part of my life and also of my decision making in terms of, you know, how my career has progressed. I came out of undergrad with a large amount of student debt, both federal and private. And then I made the decision to go back to grad school later on. So I actually have two different sets of loans that I'm trying to get forgiven through the PSLF program. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's really challenging, you know, from that very early age, like having that looming debt burden kind of hanging over your head. And yeah, it's definitely, it's very stressful, and it's, you know, informed, you know, me working in public service for sure, because I really feel like PSLF is, you know, the best promise I have to help to alleviate that debt.
Samantha, thanks so much for sharing that. And to your point about when you entered your career field and the promise of having that forgiveness up the road, I think that we hear is often a very big influencing factor. Jackie, do you have, you know, when you entered, you know, went down the path of being a public defender, did the promise of loan forgiveness, how did that play into your decisions?
Entirely. So from the time that I was 13, my father was incarcerated. And at that point, my family lost all of its income. So, you know, my mother, who's not college educated, was supporting 2 children. But those sorts of really negative experiences that my family had made me want to become a public defender and want to become an excellent public defender. So, but, you know, obviously as a low income family, that was only made possible by the prospect of student debt forgiveness. I really wanted to help New Yorkers in my family's position. And so, you know, when I learned that, oh my gosh, I can go to these top private universities and wow, it's money that I'm not really going to have to pay back because I want to work in public interest anyway. I was like, oh, you know, great, this works perfectly. Looking back, wow, do I wish I had just gone to where I had the scholarships or where, you know, a public university. It was the only way I would ever have chosen this path. So that's how.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I've even seen in the chat that people are bringing that up, and it's clearly something that resonates across. Moving a little further though into the process, and we often hear about, you know, it's once you're in and the roadblocks and the confusion that's faced, you know, especially dealing with servicers, certification. Nicole, could you talk a little bit about what obstacles you've run into in terms of certifying your loans and dealing with your servicers?
Yeah, certainly. Initially, my loans were serviced by Navient, and I was told that I would qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program through them. As we know, there's been a lawsuit about that since then. I have heard, so I'm now with FedLoan, which I managed to get myself to after a fair amount of research and a consult with an attorney. I have tried to submit paperwork that says that I qualify because, as far as I understand, over 30 hours a week qualifies me. Technically, in spite of the fact that I work more than 40 hours a week, the way that my job is coded, I'm still considered part-time by the institution, and many people who also work for the same institution have had difficulties because of the way that sort of administrative glitch is put into effect. I have tried. I don't actually believe that my loans are going to be forgiven. So I pay on a standard repayment rate because I don't want the principal to balloon. But I do go through the steps of getting myself certified under the idea that at some point before the 10 years is up, I might get a little bit of relief from the size of the payments that I have right now, or that, you know, if something happens to me, my job is a very physical job, that it might be necessary for me to step away, and that there might be a time where I needed to take those lower payments, but to, you know, to make a dent kind of while I can. And I've sent in my paperwork. Most recently, I got a letter back saying, thanks, we got your paperwork. We'll get back to you and let you know whether you qualify and how many qualifying payments you have. That was 6 months ago. It's been crickets since then. So, you know, I'm aware that FedLoan is no longer going to be servicing student debt as of December. They service 8.5 million borrowers. And I'm supposed to believe that somehow in the next, there's going to be some kind of seamless transition of 8.5 million accounts to an unknown entity in the next 12 weeks. And these people who can't even get back to me now with a coherent answer are going to be able to track that. Like, no, that's how I feel at the moment.
Yeah, no, and I think to your point of, you know, this track record of issues with these servicers, and as we look towards this big change coming, you know, not having, you know, it's hard for people to carry that confidence that it will, you know, be a smooth transition. Samantha, you obviously switched career tracks. What sort of servicing and communication issues did you encounter when you were trying to consolidate and make changes in your career, which obviously naturally there's, in so many public service roles, we need more people in, and, you know, we should be incentivizing people to jump into these roles. But what issues did you face when you would try to deal with your servicers and change course?
Sure. So I started working for a 501c3, and which is a nonprofit organization that should qualify for PSLF. And when I started working for a 501c3, I realized that I didn't have the right type of loans. So this was like pretty much right out of my undergrad. And so I was young, and I had a variety of different loans, like spread across all different servicers. So it was like Perkins loans, it was like Stafford unsubsidized and subsidized. I also have private loans, which I had to hold separately, but like, I mean, I had dozens of different types of loans with different types of servicers. So for me, consolidation was like a very stressful process. I'm very, very fortunate that I did it really early on in my career, despite the fact that I was getting, you know, and you do research, like you'll hear like, oh, well, like this loan you have has a better whatever rate, so like don't consolidate, whatever. And I was really mindful to keep my private loans separate and like make sure that I was consolidating my federal loans, you know, through the whatever federal loan process consolidation, you separate those out and like consolidate those through the government. But like, I was so stressed out during consolidation, like having to like figure out just where my loans were at such a young age. It was really stressful. And actually, like in preparation for this, like I went back and was like, when did I actually like submit my consolidation paperwork, which was apparently I applied for consolidation at the end of February in 2011, but my PSLF didn't start kicking in. Like I was employed that whole time, but like they didn't count my loans for like almost an entire year, which I believe was while my consolidation was being processed. So I was working, I was making loan payments, but like that whole time where I was waiting for that consolidation still doesn't count for my PSLF. So like I lost time. But you know, some people never have the right loan type, or they realize far later on in their career, you know, what type of loans they have and how the program works. So I think I am fortunate that I did consolidate early in my career, but I will say that like, yeah, the process for me at the time was very stressful. And I feel like I didn't have, a lot of guidance on how to do it.
Jackie, can you hear me right now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So sorry, I thought I was having a volume problem, but you know, similar, I know you experienced similar confusion and problems, but Nicole mentioned something earlier in terms of this kind of losing hope at a certain point, or that, that this process really wasn't working for you. Is there kind of in your career over your timeline, was there a point when it just felt like, something happened or you experienced something and said, this isn't working for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So I experienced a lot of the same issues as Samantha mentioned during my consolidation. And I got like very, very detailed training from my law school about you better be on top of these loan servicers, document everything, document. And so I really, really followed everything to a T. And, despite seeking consolidation as soon as possible, it took over 1.5 years and I missed out on 18 months of payments. And I've seen my colleagues seek public service loan forgiveness and not get it. And it's at a certain point, I'm just like, wow, this might never, ever happen. Actually, it's probably, I don't think it's going to happen. And as a result, I've taken on extra jobs that have nothing to do with having a law degree. I do overnight nannying to save up money for the eventual time when I'm told that my loans are not going to be forgiven, because I fully expect that to happen. I put things off. I put off spending money that I need to spend, like on my pets and veterinary appointments or on getting dental surgery, because the thought of going into more debt terrifies me. And the thought of, especially of ever missing a qualifying payment, I mean, it's like the last thing. No, like it's no matter what, that payment needs to be made. So yeah, it's honestly, I've had times, I've been working here as a public defender for the past 7.5 years. And I often think, and my family will say, and my friends will say, why don't you just go private? Maybe you should just go private and just make a ton of money, and then you can just pay your loans off quickly. And I say to myself, I'm like, that I might have to do that in the end, because my loan now, I've been making the minimum payments this whole time because a public defender salary does not give you a lot of extra room. And so I've not even scratched the surface of my principal loan amount. It's ballooned now. From the time that I graduated in 2013, it's ballooned to over $190,000, which I've heard of people having more, but it's a really scary amount. So yeah, I have those thoughts pretty much weekly. Like, am I doing the right thing? Is this ever going to happen?
And that effect, and Jackie, you mentioned it's not just you, but it's other people in your profession. And when I think of both you and Nicole, both in these very, especially during COVID, these very frontline professions, how have you all seen, Nicole, if you want to grab this one, but how have you seen the impact of the last year, affect the people around you, and especially as it relates to, people's, willingness and ability to kind of keep working towards this, unseen loan forgiveness, promised but unseen loan forgiveness?
I never planned to be a physical therapist in a hospital. I certainly never planned to be a physical therapist in an ICU during a pandemic. I'm exhausted. Our teams are exhausted. Everybody that I am with is traumatized. We have seen so many people die. And we have been told that we are heroes. And I certainly have witnessed enough acts of heroism in the last 17 months that would break anybody's heart. But I don't know if I can do this for another 6 years. A lot of people that I work with we're fleeing healthcare. There is a mass exodus. Anybody that can get out is getting out, because it doesn't seem, and people are making really, really difficult financial choices and choices about their children's future, because they don't think that they can keep doing this work that will qualify them to have this debt forgiven. I'm active in my union. We're bargaining right now. We're frontline workers. We're fighting for reasonable staffing so that we can provide safe care. And we're fighting for cost of living increases. But even if we get them, they won't make a dent in the ability to pay these student loan payments once the payment pause ends. So, you know, it feels right now like we can't get ahead and we've sacrificed so much already. And it's really hard. It's hard for me, and it's hard to see that about the people that I work with who I have a great deal of respect and admiration for.
You know, obviously, you know, all of you, you know, speaking for, I think, so many people out there, you know, in similar shoes, but Nicole, you talked about, you know, obviously we all know the payment pause is looming, and unfortunately we have to wrap up at this point, but I just want to give Samantha, Jackie, Nicole, thank you all so much for sharing your stories. I know this is not easy, but it's also going to help a lot of people not feel quite as alone in their journeys. But with this time and this opportunity for the administration to take action on public service loan forgiveness, what would you want to tell the general public or this administration about, you know, why this is, you know, we've heard why this is so needed through all three of your stories, but anything you want to leave people with?
I will start if that's okay. I've heard that there's discussion of 10K and loan forgiveness. I don't want to seem ungrateful, but that's quite a bit less than a third of what the federal government is planning to charge me in interest on the loans. So I think that we really need to not only overhaul the public service loan forgiveness rates, but we need to lower interest on student debt so that it's more affordable. And we need to provide really substantial forgiveness for frontline workers and public service workers who are out there serving their communities. It's not like we did this and went into venture capital, you know? This is like, we took these loans because we were public service minded people who wanted to help other people. And I think we need to do more. Ladies? Jackie or Samantha?
Sure. You know, I completely agree with Nicole. I just want to the administration, I feel super lied to. I feel tricked. I started taking out these loans when I was 17, like I said, thinking almost like it was monopoly money, like I was going to be, like I could afford this somehow. And now I'm 33, I've been married for a while, and I don't ever see a future where I can afford to have a child, because I don't see a future where my partner and I are going to not be oppressed by this ever-growing mountain of debt. And again, yeah, 10,000, or they're talking about 50,000 in student debt forgiveness, does not even touch the sides for most of us. I think especially for those of us who have sought higher education beyond undergraduate. So yeah, I would welcome Samantha if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you both said. I mean, it's very clear it's a broken system. And I do think we were promised the opportunity for loan forgiveness for 10 years worth of service. And I think nuance about what type of loan you had should not be the thing that holds you back. I think that as long as you're doing the work and you've been, you know, trying to make your payments on whatever plan you're on, then I feel like that debt should be forgiven. I feel like that was the promise we were given.
Well, thank you all three. I mean, there's really nothing else left to say besides thank you all three for being here, for sharing all this. And, you know, this message couldn't be more loud and clear from you three. So thank you all so much. Now we're going to transition to the final part of our presentation today. And Mike Pierce, the policy director at the Student Borrower Protection Center, is going to lead a short presentation on managing student loans and accessing and some of the details of PSLF. But all three, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Walt. And I want to echo what Walt just said and thank our incredible panelists for sharing their stories here today. This has really been, it's tough to hear how much the system has let people down as they're serving in their communities. And it's really, you know, remarkable that you were willing to come up here and share your story. So thank you on behalf of everybody that's participating today. I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully this works. So as Walt mentioned, my name is Mike. I'm the policy director at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And I want to spend a little bit of time today, since we're all here, talking about the rules of the road for public service loan forgiveness, but recognizing that this path is rocky. And there are tricks and traps along the way that sound just like the tricks and traps that were put in place that knocked so many public service workers off track here and have made 98 out of every 100 people that apply for PSLF end up without getting any benefit at all. And I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that this is the right system where things are working the right way. We are all here today because we want better, and we want the federal government to keep its promise to public service workers and deliver the debt relief that everybody's been promised. But I am going to talk through the rules of the road here, the way the program works, the things you need to watch out for anybody that's in the beginning of their public service career. It's possible to do this. You can get loan forgiveness if you manage to steer your way through all of the obstacles that the system puts in your path. And so I'm going to walk through that just a little bit. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening in the student loan system right now to be wary of, even if you're already doing all the right things, just to try to help you stay on track for PSLF. And then I'm going to end with, I think, the most important part of this presentation and the most important thing that's going on right now for everybody that works in public service and has student debt, is this opportunity to tell President Biden and to tell Secretary Cardona that they need to do better, that they need to keep their promise and deliver debt relief to everybody that's working in public service for more than a decade, and give everyone else that's been in public service for less than a decade credit for the time that they've served, and not use these ticky-tack tricks and traps that have been put in place as a way to deny people debt relief. So first, I am going to talk a little bit about what PSLF is, but most of you know this already. The program's based on 4 requirements that seem simple and often aren't. You need to have the right type of loan. You need to have the right type of repayment plan. You need to have the right type of employment. So you need to work for a public service organization, and you need to make the right number of payments. So you need to do 1, 2, and 3 every month for 120 months before the federal government will cancel your debt. And if you do all of these things, you can get loan forgiveness under PSLF. Thousands of people have managed to do it, even as tens of thousands have been rejected. So the first piece of advice here that we give everybody is, at the very beginning of your public service career, make sure you have the right type of loan. If you took out a federal student loan since 2010, so for younger public service workers in particular, you probably don't run into the same problems that lots of us that started in public service back before 2010 ran into when we were first trying to figure out how to get on track for PSLF. That's because the only federal student loans that the vast majority of people that went to school since 2010 have are things called direct loans. These are loans made directly by the US Department of Education. The government is your lender, and these loans automatically qualify for PSLF. They are automatically the right type of loan. But lots of borrowers with older loans, this is the thing that's knocked so many people off track. Lots of borrowers with older loans made by banks and other private lenders like Sallie Mae, loans made directly by people's schools, the Perkins Loan Program, there's a step they can take to get on track for PSLF. But if you don't do it at the beginning of your career, you're going to end up spending years longer making loan payments than you need to. So it's really important, if you have one of these older loans and you're just getting out of finishing up school, or you're just switching into a public service career, you need to take this extra step. It's called consolidation. It's basically refinancing your student loan into a new direct loan that pays off those old loans and puts you on track for PSLF. You can do that by going to studentaid.gov. There's a form you fill out. At the same time, you can switch your repayment plan, make sure you do the next thing I'm going to talk about. It means that you will have a loan that can be eligible for PSLF, but be careful. So anyone that does this, that consolidates these old loans into a new direct loan, if you've been working in public service for a while and you also have direct loans and you take that step, you'll lose your credit on your direct loans because you're creating a new loan and it starts you on day 0. These are all exactly the kinds of tricks and traps that we want to see Secretary Cardona and President Biden clear away. This is exactly what's wrong with the system, these kind of catch-22s. If you fall into a technical thing here and you lose years of credit towards public service loan forgiveness, That's not on you, but those are the rules of the system right now. So just beware. And then also lots of people don't know that if you have a parent loan and you work in public service, PSLF is available to the borrower, not to the student. And so if you took out parent loans to help your student or your kid or your grandkid go to college, and you work in public service, you can be on track for public service loan forgiveness for those parent loans, but you have to consolidate them into a new direct consolidation loan. The next requirement here is you need to be in the right type of payment plan. That means that you need to enroll in income-driven repayment. If I can leave you with any single piece of advice here, it's that income-driven repayment is the engine that drives public service loan forgiveness. So you need to get enrolled in IDR as soon as you start repaying student loans, and you need to stay in it for as long as you can, for 10 years. And it doesn't matter whether you have enough income to have to make a, quote, monthly payment. So under the rules for PSLF, if you are a worker that's earning relatively low wages, you might be able to have a $0 per month payment. And what that means is you're not making any payments towards your loans, but you are making progress towards PSLF. And so getting into IDR and getting into IDR early is really, really important. And if you have to do those extra steps that I mentioned before to consolidate, you now can enroll in IDR as part of the same paperwork. That wasn't something that was in place for lots of us when we were first taking those steps early in our careers. But it does exist now. And if you're starting from zero, you can make it through this system. I also wanted to flag that the definition of what it means to be a public service worker under this program may not be obvious to folks. And there are lots of people out there that are working in public service every day and don't realize that they're eligible for loan forgiveness. That's because PSLF has an incredibly broad definition of what is a public service organization. And it actually doesn't care about what kind of job you do every day. So whether you're a frontline provider working in a school or in a courthouse or in a hospital, doing something that everyone acknowledges as public service work, or whether you have a job in a back office as an accountant or a lawyer and you're helping a nonprofit or a government agency do its business every day, as long as your employer is a government agency, a federal, state, or local government, a public school district, a branch of the armed forces, or a 501c3 nonprofit, if you're in one of those two categories, it doesn't matter what your job is. It just matters what your employer, the tax status of your employer. And you are in a public service profession eligible for public service loan forgiveness, regardless of what you do when you go to work every day. There's an exception to that rule, and that's if you work for a nonprofit organization that's not a 501c3. Then it actually does matter what you do, what your organization's primary mission is, and there's a process. And if folks have run into trouble getting the education department to certify that you work for an organization performing certain qualifying services as another nonprofit, please reach out to us. I'll share a couple times during this presentation, PSLF@protectborrowers.org. It's PSLF@protectborrowers.org. Lots of people have run into trouble when they work for nonprofits that are not 501c3s because the education department has completely failed to put into place a set of standards that let people access PSLF. And so borrowers are routinely denied when they should be given the green light. And so we want to hear from you if you've run into that kind of trouble. The other thing I want to flag here is that you do need to be working full-time. And as our panelists talked about, the definition of full-time is often in the eye of the employer. And this is really wrong, but it's the rules that are in place right now. If you work for multiple employers, you can stitch together 30 hours worth of multiple part-time jobs and tell the federal government that you work full-time. But if you work more than 30 hours a week for a single employer and your employer's not willing to sign a form that says you work full-time, it doesn't matter if you work more than 30 hours a week. The federal government doesn't care. And this is a thing that trips people up unnecessarily. And again, we hope to see policy change fixed, but right now, these are the rules. I also wanted to flag the last key element here to get on track for public service loan forgiveness, maybe seemingly the most simple, but a place where lots of people get tripped up, is the requirement that you make the right number of payments. So when we say serve in public service for 10 years and you get your debt canceled, what the government actually cares about is that you serve for 120 months while you meet all 4 of these requirements. And so they actually count month to month, whether you work for the right type of employer, whether you have the right type of loan, whether you're enrolled in the right repayment plan. And every month for 120 months, you have to check those boxes. Your payments also need to be full monthly payments. It's not just the amount Unfortunately, this is another thing that's tripped up people over the past decade. It's not just the amount that's on your student loan bill, it's the amount that the government considers to be a full monthly payment. And they don't always tell you what that is. And so lots of people are paying the amount due on their student loan bill every month, sometimes through automatic payments. And then they find out years later that months or years of qualifying service gets tossed aside because the amount that they were paying every month wasn't the right amount according to some spreadsheet that they'd never seen before. And so again, we want to hear from borrowers. That we'll talk more about the opportunity to tell the federal government how this went wrong and why you've been denied debt relief you deserve. But just know, if you're trying to do a checkup on your own student loan account and you want to make sure you're on track, you need to be paying the full amount that's due on your student loan. And you might not be able to figure that out without calling your student loan company to check to make sure that you're making the right monthly payment. That includes another warning around timeliness. So you need to be making monthly payments on time every month. So skipping a couple months and then making a big payment isn't going to give you credit for all of those months. It's only going to give you credit for the month that you made the payment. You have to make an individual monthly payment every month. The rules have changed. And so recently you've been able to make payments in advance and can prepay your loans for up to 12 months. That wasn't always true. And there are lots of public service workers that had employers that made loan payments on their behalf early in their careers and actually knocked their public service employees off track for public service loan forgiveness, because the very ticky-tack rules around this program said back in the beginning, and for most of PSLF's life, that if you paid the next 3 months or the next 6 months payments all at once, you'd only get credit for one qualifying payment. That has changed. And now if your employer is making a lump sum payment on your behalf, or if you come into some money and you want to make a payment up front while you have it, you can do that and get credit for multiple months towards PSLF. But that is a brand new rule that has not always been in place. The other, in addition to enrolling in income-driven repayment, the other really important single piece of advice that I'd want to leave you with today is check to make sure you're on track. So there is a government form that you can fill out that will tell the education department's extremely, I don't want to oversell this, but extremely incompetent student loan contractor to look at your student loan account and give you some indication of whether you're on track or not. And we've heard from our panelists the absolutely horrible stories about Fed Loan Servicing, the government student loan contractor, mismanaging people's accounts, giving them wrong information. So this is not a panacea. This is not an answer to all of your problems, but it is the best way to do kind of a midstream check here and figure out whether you are on track for public service loan forgiveness. So you fill out this form and you submit it, and your student loan company becomes a company called Fed Loan. That was true for most of the past decade. That's about to change, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But when you fill out this form and you get a checkup on your student loan account, you have the opportunity to find out whether you're off track, and you can make course corrections. But if you've never filled out one of these forms, don't worry. They're not required. It's just a way to figure out if you're on track. So I want to make sure, since I know we're running out of time here, that I do talk about a couple changes that are on the horizon and a couple common problems that people encounter when repaying student debt. And unfortunately, our panelists have done a great job telling their story about why the system is broken, why there's no justice for so many public service workers, and why the administration needs to fix this mess. But just know that they're not alone. 99 out of every 100 people got rejected for public service loan forgiveness in the early days of the program. A bunch of things were purportedly done to try to fix this mess so more people could get on track. And 4 years later, 98 out of every 100 people are rejected for public service loan forgiveness. We have not fixed anything. And so what that means is you really need to be aware of what your rights are. And if you're navigating the current system, just be incredibly careful. The one exception to that kind of broad pronouncement that we haven't fixed anything is the temporary expanded PSLF program, or TEPSLF. So for some borrowers with certain loans, you can get the federal government to do a second look at your student loan and access PSLF if you were in the wrong repayment plan. So only certain payment plans count for most borrowers, but if you can get access to TEPSLF you might have some flexibility and you might still be able to get loan forgiveness, even if you were not in the right payment plan the entire time you were in repayment. The program can be complicated. You have to have served for 10 years and have made 120 payments under some payment plan to even be eligible for a look. So lots of people that were in the wrong payment plan for some part of their service but haven't served for a decade can't get access to this program yet. There's lots of reasons why this doesn't work properly, but it is a way forward for a very small share of borrowers. But again, it's not working very well either. This is the program meant to fix PSLF that the Trump administration put in place, and this rejects 96% of people who apply to it, which I think is a great segue to what we want to see in the world, to what comes next here. And that's, how do we fix this mess for everybody that's serving in public service to make sure that 10 years of public service is all you need to do to have your federal student loan canceled, no matter what kind of loan it is, no matter what payment plan you were in, no matter what your student loan servicer told you back in 2011. It's 2021 and everyone that served for a decade should have their loans canceled. And everybody else that's been working in public service should get credit for every year of service they have served. We want to flag a couple things here. So first, that right now payments are paused for everybody that has a direct loan and everybody that has other kinds of loans that are owned by the Department of Education. That means that if you meet all the other criteria for PSLF, the right type of loan, the right type of payment plan, that means that you are on track for PSLF, even if you're not making payments right now. But there are lots of things that are tripping people up still, even though people's payments are paused, particularly for people who have had reductions of hours during the pandemic, or for people that have lost a public service job. It's still a rough road, and it's why the federal government needs to do more than just pause payments for public service workers. They need to give them a way out. In addition, and I mentioned this a couple times, and I just want to really push on this point, Fed Loan Servicing, the student loan company responsible for handling all public service loan forgiveness student loan borrower accounts, just quit. It's been accused of a whole range of abuses. It's been sued by state attorneys general in New York and Massachusetts. It was called in front of Congress, and its CEO allegedly lied to Senator Warren and Senator Kennedy about just how bad of a job it was doing. And then at the end of the day, it quit. And so at the end of the year, the company that everyone's relied on to keep accurate records, to track your progress towards public service loan forgiveness, is no longer going to have a seat at the table. And every public service worker that is currently being handled by Fed Loan Servicing, more than 1 million people who have certified some amount of public service, they're going to have their student loan company changed. And we're going to have to trust that this goes right and that people's records aren't lost and that people's accounts aren't mismanaged. And the best thing you can do if you're on track for PSLF and FedLoan is your company right now is download everything you can off of your student account and make sure you keep good records, because I think we're really, really worried that it's going to get very messy. And that's actually a good segue into what comes next here. As Randi Weingarten said at the top, and as has been repeated a few times during today's program, the Biden administration has asked for you to share their stories, to share your story. They want to hear why public service loan forgiveness hasn't worked for you, how you've been knocked off track, and why it's important that they keep this promise to deliver debt relief, particularly as part of the administration's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 33,000 people have submitted their stories already and have shared with the Biden administration why it is emergently necessary for people who work in public service to just get their debts canceled and to stop with the tricks and the traps and the technical requirements that have knocked a whole generation of public service workers off track. I wanted to share our contact information one more time too. Our email address for this campaign and to reach out to the Student Borrower Protection Center is pslf@protectborrowers.org. That's pslf@protectborrowers.org. And to round out our program, I just want to hand the mic now back to Walt to say thanks to everybody, and thank you all for joining, for sticking around for our panelists' incredibly compelling stories and this little bit of information about how you can get involved and help change things for a generation of public service workers. Walt, I think you're still on mute. But maybe we lost what? Well, in that case, I will just say thank you on behalf of everybody. Thank our panelists. Thank Natalia and Randy at the top for opening us up here. Thank you all who asked questions in the chat. We'll do our best to follow up with folks offline where we can, but please do send feedback to pslf@protectborrowers.org. And please do respond to our to the RFI, the request for information the federal government has opened up. We need your stories to help make a difference here and to help change things. Thank you all so much for joining us.